It's the Believe in Texans podcast brought to you by FanDuel. I'm going to do my list of grievances today, of which there are many, mostly involving the Texans offense. And I encourage you guys to chime in the comments on YouTube and let me know what I miss. I'm going to miss a bunch here, but we've got a lot to get to. We've got the absence of C.J. Stroud and exactly what that's going to look like. We've got play selection on the goal line. So much. FanDuel had the Texans as 2-point favorites by the time this game was played, I believe, and they did not cover. For those of you who have that as one of your grievances, from the time C.J. Stroud got injured, I knew immediately that was going to be one of the most painstakingly awful and tension-filled days I'd had watching football in a while, because we knew what it was. It was, other than that little hint of a promise for that touch throw that Davis Mills had to Nico Collins, once everything stalled out, it was just a battle of avoiding attrition defensively, and ultimately they couldn't. But I'll start with just the inability to score from the 1-yard line. I'm going to show you an alarming graphic here, and you might not be able to see it if you're watching on YouTube. Don't worry. I'll describe it to those of you who are listening. Basically, it's touchdowns scored with 2 or less yards to goal this season. The Colts and the Bills have 11 apiece. First of all, I'm amazed that football teams are allowed to get down to the 1 and 2 yard line as frequently as that. The Texans have a hard enough time just making it to the 20, but those two teams have 11 touchdowns apiece. I got this from Texans Cap, and way at the bottom with 0 is the Houston Texans. They have not scored a single touchdown when they've had 1 or 2 yards to go. The Saints have a couple, the Raiders, the Dolphins, all of them have 1 or 2. I can't read it myself. This is what you need to understand about being on the 1-yard line. And I know these stats, but I updated just to be sure that they hadn't changed. I know these stats because there was a time where Bill O'Brien had the offense down at the 1-yard line. It was 1st and goal on the 1-yard line, and the Texans didn't get in. And Bill O'Brien, as he sometimes righteously did, came into the press conference, said, "Hey, it's hard to score in the NFL." So I thought, well, how hard is it from the 1-yard line when you've got 1st and goal? It's over 90% of the time. Over 90% of the time, you're going to score from the 1-yard line. On any given play, you've got about a 50% chance of scoring just on that single play. When you're on the 1-yard line, it's about a 45% chance from the 2-yard line. So the Texans now have had, between the Bucs game and yesterday, at least 10 instances of that, plus the Seahawks game. Can't remember off the top of my head how many plays they had down there, and they haven't scored a single one. So it's bad. It's really bad. And D'Amico in his press conference today said basically, what you can say about a lot of people criticizing play calling, that, hey, if it works, you get credit. If it works, it's great. If it doesn't work, you get criticized for it. So, we try to pass the ball in, and people criticize us for passing. We try to run, they criticize us for running. Here's the issue. In the Bucs game, they ran them all they ran all those plays out of gun. So no threat of the play action whatsoever. This game, they run 4 times in a row. Two of the runs were fullback dives, which I like fullback dives as a wrinkle every now and then. Sorry, I just did some hand signal that made balloons show up on the video, but I don't know how that happens. But it's certainly not celebrating touchdowns. You run 4 times in a row, 2 of them fullback dives, and fullback dives are great as a rhythm changer. The rhythm, it throws the rhythm off. The defense kind of expects a certain timing, a certain beat to run on the goal line. And when you give it to the fullback, sometimes it just kind of catches everybody by surprise. You don't do it 2 times in a row. And you certainly don't expect that British Brooks is going to win the 1-on-1 matchup versus Dre Greenlaw consistently. And that's where I think, as much as, yes, the offensive line is an issue, I think that D'Amico doesn't quite get the talent disparity there is between his players on offense and some of these defenses like the Denver Broncos, because that defensive line was clearly just more physical, more tough, more everything blue collar than the Texans offensive line is. And when you're down on the goal line and you're playing a super condensed formation where you've got all 11 players on offense are right there at the line of scrimmage, all in the formation, There's no threat to anybody on the defense of anything else happening. And you run you run three plays in a row. You finally sneak it on the fourth play. DeMeco said that he got in, but I don't know. Maybe they saw a different angle than I did. I couldn't tell from the TV copy, and I hadn't looked at it on the All-22 yet. It's hey, you'd set them up for a play action there, but also you're facing a defense that is without its best defensive player, cornerback Patrick Surtain. And the one place on the defense that his absence hurts the absolute least is right up the gut on goal line. Those guys are observers largely on runs up the gut on goal line, where meanwhile you've got a tiny Abrams Drain who's replacing him. You've got gargantuan wide receivers on your team. You've got a tight end. You've got Juice damn Scruggs for all I care. Have him leak out on a play action. And they just, in DeMeco's comments after the game and today, it felt like what I feared, which is that, hey, that's about toughness and imposing your will and all those things. And yeah, I believe in all of that stuff, except that sometimes you're just fighting up a weight class or three. And that's what the Texans are doing on that in that situation. So I don't quite get it. Ultimately, it's on Caserio as well because they don't have the offensive line. They don't currently have the running backs. They're going to scare you on the goal line. Joe Mixon likely would have made it in on one of those plays. Here's the problem. Joe Mixon isn't on your roster, so you can't call plays as if Joe Mixon was there when Joe Mixon isn't there. It's very, very frustrating. We've only gone through my first grievance. Let's get to the end of the game time management. So when the Texans are on their own 13-yard line, and they've gone 5 straight series where they've had to punt the ball. I believe it was a 3-and-out, a 3-and-out, a 3-and-out, a 4-and-out, and a 5-and-out, if I'm not mistaken. Very few first downs to come by after that last field goal. And the problem there is the Texans could have run the clock down to under 20 seconds if they had run the ball and Peyton had used his timeouts immediately. They likely would have punted, and the Broncos would have gotten the ball with somewhere between maybe about 10 seconds left, 20 at most, with no timeouts. So their ability to get downfield and kick a field goal would have been just about impossible. So especially at 10 seconds. And I get what DeMeco wanted to do. He wanted to get the first down. He wanted to perhaps get some spark or something. In that situation, in a time crunch, with the offense being what it was, I don't. And then with the opponent having 2 timeouts, I just can't get with the never say die attitude in that moment. We're going to make something happen. I think, frankly, if Sean Payton were in the same situation with the same quarterback and the same offensive issues, I think he would have probably just done exactly what a lot of people have been suggesting DeMeco should have done, which is just run the ball. Maybe you get a first down or something. At the very least, run the ball on first down and see what happens after all that. That was disappointing to me because we've just had more game management issues. Really, after a really promising first year for DeMeco when he was a rookie head coach, they had very few game management issues. It seems like they've become increasingly suspect in a lot of ways. Some of these grievances of mine don't necessarily have anybody to complain about specifically. I am a little peeved about Davis Mills' contract extension right now. That if you can't rely a guy to come in and execute the game plan, and he's a well-paid backup. He's a well-paid backup quarterback. Of quarterbacks who aren't former first-round picks or what have you, or guys that got benched, he's amongst the highest-paid backup quarterbacks in the league, and that's frankly that's not what I'm paying for right there. That was not my desire. The quarterback I'd like to be paying as well as he is, and we'll see. Maybe with a week of preparation, it looks different. I'm not sure. The C.J. Stroud is in the concussion protocol. Titus Howard is in the concussion protocol. We won't know anything at all, really, until we hear more, because every situation is unique. I think the average time to return to play is somewhere a little over a week. So you can kind of figure, especially CJ having had a previous concussion, that maybe takes at least a week off before he's cleared to play. But it's not a great situation. FanDuel does have the Texans as 1.5-point favorites this week versus the Jaguars, which is a pleasant surprise. Jaguars, we'll talk about them a little bit at the end if we have time. The speaking of CJ's concussion, CJ's slide or late slide or whatever it was, and the hit by Abrams drain. D'Amico talked today about what he's learned about the way they officiate that call as opposed to maybe how they did it in the past.
Yeah, look, it's a tough play, right? The quarterback is sliding. I thought the quarterbacks are protected when they slide, but what I'm learning is if you hit them, don't hit them in the head or neck area, they slide. You hit them in the chest, and that's just fine. So that's what I learned.
I kind of enjoyed the smile there. He learned it. Yeah, I guess he had some conversations. He had conversations with the officials a couple times during the game. I know a lot of you had questions about, since we're on the officials real quick, when Xavier Hutchinson caught that pass and it looked like he went out of bounds, but the clock kept rolling. They said that his knee was down, and I went back and watched it a bunch of times, and you couldn't tell from the TV copy, but it looked like it was very possible that his knee was down. You could actually hear on TV the official telling D'Amico that his knee was down. Look, this is where I am with the way they're officiating the quarterback slide. I don't know if there's a perfect way to enforce this rule or not. I personally stumped last year. I stumped for them to call it the way they called it yesterday, which is that if a quarterback is sliding late and if a guy is coming in and he hits him and it's not in the head and neck area, that unless the quarterback is already down in his slide and on the ground, that I think the defense deserves the benefit of the doubt. And I think that quarterbacks, when they're sliding, and especially when other quarterbacks are faking sliding, but those guys when they're running, it is really hard as a defender to all of a sudden throttle down and think, well, maybe he slides, maybe he doesn't. Let me just tiptoe up here and see what goes on. Like you're coming after him and you're trying to get him down before he hits that line to gain, which is where he was, CJ was 2 yards shy of it. And if he'd slid earlier and gotten flatter earlier, wouldn't have been as devastating a hit, I think. So for me, it's on the quarterbacks, and I can't change my opinion based on the fact that it's my quarterback and the guy I want to preserve and stay healthy. That's a benefit that quarterbacks have is extra protection. But once you get out and you're out in danger, once you're out in the real world out there past the line of scrimmage, you don't get as many of those protections, and you gotta take it upon yourself to slide early and keep yourself out of harm's way. One thing this is not anybody's fault in particular, but just the loss of the jumbo package for as long as Titus Howard is out, unless they work one of these other guys back in. I don't know what Trent Brown's deal is, if he'll ever play or if he's healthy or anything, but this was D'Amico's asked in his press conference how much that affected them not being able to do the jumbo package of the six offensive linemen. D'Amico said that it didn't affect their functioning. All right, they ran it 13 times out of their first 33 plays. So more than a third of the time they were in jumbo. And I think it's something that they really like having, especially for a team that struggles to establish physicality, struggles to pick up blitzes at times or pass protect unless CJ's getting rid of it really quickly. I think it does definitely affect them. We'll see if they figure out a way to use it this week. I thought Blake Fisher, by and large, did a good job in that game. The level of difficulty was less in the second half, partly just because the Broncos were playing a lot of just dropping 8 guys into coverage and making Davis Mills sort things out and figure it out on his own. I had his graphic here. The offensive line performance while we're on it. This is interesting by Texans Cap. He had the configuration where it's Ursary, Scruggs, Andrews, Ingram, and Howard from left to right is at 6.52 expected points added per game. Just don't worry about that. Just remember 6.52. Ursary and then Tomlinson at left guard, and then all the other same guys was at 1.19 EPA per game. So about like 1/6 of what it was with Scruggs at left guard. It's interesting just because it's not like I think it just runs better with Scruggs in there. It's not like he's grading out necessarily all that much better or even better than Tomlinson, but things seem to operate better when Scruggs is in there. And yet there does still seem to be an open tryout. And that's one of my grievances is that we're midway through the season and they can't figure out who their starting left guard is. And I don't get it. And for them to act like, yeah, they just play better. They play better when they're kind of on a pitch count. You wouldn't be saying that if you felt good about one of those guys, right? Like there's no, if that were the case, then we'd be running this experiment all over the place with the offensive linemen all the time. Maybe Ed Ingram's really best when he's getting 65% of the snaps. Titus has been playing pretty well, but let's see how he does with 82% of the snaps instead of 100% of the snaps. It's just not done. And I am all for trying something innovative or something and out of the box. I've wondered, a lot of people ask that question all the time, why don't offensive linemen rotate? And there are reasons for it. They don't get as fatigued. The cohesion matters, the teamwork matters, and the communication between all those guys. They get comfortable with each other. But I'd be cool with it as an experiment if it wasn't fueled by a sense of desperation and an understanding that, man, at left guard and at center, I don't know what the future is or who the guys are going to be or if it's going to get better this year. I think Ursary has improved over these last couple of weeks. He had I haven't watched him individually yet. The first few series I was watching him specifically because I wanted to see him versus Nick Bonito. And I thought he held his own. Wasn't nearly as bad or as scary as I feared it was going to be. So Ursary's coming along and he's making progress. But the rotation at left guard, I just don't get it. Okay, this one's a big one. A lot of you really aren't going to like this stat. The number of snaps that Jaylen Noel played yesterday, because I at first, Sean Pendergast asked me this morning, said, well, like, why were they not getting Jaylen Noel more involved? And I thought, well, maybe Mills is just having a hard time finding him. Yeah, if CJ was out there, he'd be slinging it all over the place to Jaylen Noel. Jaylen Noel played 11 snaps on offense yesterday via Cody Stutes, which equaled 15% of the total offensive snaps. He played 8 special team snaps. Every offensive player except British Brooks, who also had 11 snaps, played more than Jaylen Noel. After Jaylen Noel looked very, very promising and has done some good things as of late. And the only answer I guess I could have for you is that they like putting their veterans in there. They like seeing what Christian Kirk can do. And hey, he's got that veteran presence. He doesn't make these rookie mistakes that Jaylen Noel does. Yeah, but Jaylen Noel is really, really fast, and Jaylen Noel has made some really good plays. He made a good play yesterday on the punt return. The hesitancy to play the rookies, I get it. I get it if they're just not on the same page as everybody else. Get them on the same page. Get your rookies advanced and developing. Because I look around the league and we play some of these teams that I look, Tyler Warren, he's a tight end, but he's a rookie. And man, is he a big part of that Colts offense. That's some of this falls back on. I'm watching Jaylen Noel, and I understand if there's issues with him not running routes properly or doing whatever the issue is, but that is also the job of the coaches to get it done. So the absence or near absence of Jaylen Noel is very much bothering me. I would have the wild card standings up here, but I didn't add it. The biggest thing to know about the wild card standings is that you're a couple games behind the Jaguars, and you're a couple games behind the Chiefs. I believe the Jaguars are a half game ahead of the Chiefs. So you do control your own destiny in that regard. You can catch the Jaguars. You play the Chiefs in Kansas City, but you play the Jaguars this week. So they're 9th seed right now. Remember, 7 teams make the playoffs right now. And some of the teams that are, I don't want to say entrenched, I guess the other teams would be the Patriots and the Bills and where they go. Whichever one of those teams eventually ends up in the wild card race, you're chasing those guys too. So you've got a hand in that, and at least you play the Bills. I was hoping for the Bills to lose yesterday to kind of just start whittling them down. And because the Texans, if they're going to make the playoffs, have a chance to whittle it down even further for the Bills. But one thing about the Bills matchup with the Chiefs that's interesting is that the Bills' run defense is atrocious, but the Chiefs don't run the ball all that well. So the Bills' pass defense is still good, and they're able to really play the Chiefs' offense tough, but the Chiefs aren't necessarily going to lean into exploiting the weakness of the Bills' run defense. I don't think between now and 3 weeks from now that all of a sudden the Texans are going to have a magnificent rushing offense, unless Joe Mixon comes back and they make a few more minor improvements on the offensive line. but the Bills look like they're rounding into form. The Chiefs look like they're inevitable. They've stolen. I've seen headlines of this where it says the Chiefs are inevitable. Very, very annoying. Very annoying. So the rotation at left guard, the end of game time management, the loss of the jumbo package, the inability to score from the 1 yard line, the current wild card standings, and then we have the trade deadline. Sean Pendergast asked today if the Texans would want to trade a 3rd round pick, or would you approve of the Texans trading a 3rd round pick for Breece Hall of the New York Jets? And the responses when I looked at it were very divided. It looked about 50-50 between people that were saying, look, what is Breece Hall going to do really to fix the offensive line? What can he possibly do to make this much better? And then the others weren't even necessarily voting or endorsing Breece Hall as much as, yeah, why not? Sure, what the hell? Very little passion behind it. This morning when I was sleep deprived and pissed off and just wanted to I was in a mode of desperation. I said, yeah, 3rd rounder for Breece Hall on an expiring contract. Let's do it. Let's go for it. I've rethought my stance on that. I came to my senses. And for one reason, I didn't look at the draft picks. That 3rd round, I believe, would be a Giants 3rd rounder from the trade this last draft. I don't want to give that up. So I certainly don't want to give that up. A 4th rounder might be my ceiling right now. I will push back a little bit on the notion that Breece Hall wouldn't help out the offense at all because there is, look, more good players is always a good thing. And it's not like all of a sudden the offensive line is going to look awesome. But I think Woody Marks is still a rookie in some regards. There's times where he's not necessarily hitting things the way I think that he should ideally as a running back when he's a running back. Awesome as a receiving threat, but he still has some seasoning, whereas Breece Hall's a veteran. Nick Chubb, I don't know if he's going to get any more explosive or powerful than he is right now. Maybe he will, and maybe he'll ascend a little bit, but there's just not a lot of pop back there in the backfield. And Breece Hall's not as big as Nick Chubb, but he's bigger than Woody Marks. So in terms of you can have almost a large, medium, small in terms of size and like 3rd down ability and all of that, and where Breece Hall is a little bit more of an all-purpose back than Woody Marks is. Might be a nice compliment to Woody Marks. And it gets more speed on the field. Jaylen Noel and these other guys in Jaden Higgins, I think at some point, if CJ comes back this week, maybe they need to have a come to Jesus meeting in the O-line in the offensive meeting room with D'Amico and just really think about where they are. And D'Amico's never going to admit that he thinks about playoff standings or anything like that. But it's got to be hard when you're 3-5. I fully appreciate trying to take it one step at a time and just, the next most important opponent is the next opponent. But you go to 3-6 and it gets really, really tough. They're not barring a miracle comeback or anything. Teams have done it plenty of times before. And I think CJ Stroud is capable of doing it. The real shame of yesterday's game was just that, man, CJ was doing some really good things. And CJ was throwing into the teeth of the blitz at times. He was making the right decisions on where to go with the ball, when to play it safe, when to be aggressive, all of those things. And it does seem that this death by 1,000 cuts offense, which I know I accidentally called it death by 1,000 paper cuts instead of just cuts yesterday. I'm pretty sure that was a Freudian slip because it feels a little bit like death by 1,000 paper cuts. Like it just, you're slicing and dicing with construction paper right up until you get into the red zone. And then all of a sudden your construction paper crumples against a 350-pound Samoan dude. It's just that they're down there. They're fighting with, you ever have those nightmares where you try to punch somebody and the punch just doesn't land? It just falls completely dead on arrival. That's what it's like when they reach the red zone. The death by 1,000 cuts just loses its umph when you're down there and you got to play one-on-one, man versus man, just rugby scrum style of football. But I'm going to have possibly Bucky Brooks on later in the week. Thank you to FanDuel for sponsoring the Believe in Texans podcast. I'll be in a better mood by Wednesday. I'm going to watch Davis Mills highlights on a loop. I hope it's longer than a few minutes. I don't know how long that loop's going to be.